It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are talking about the short fiction of Tamsyn Muir.
Yes.
We have read 3 of Tamsyn's short stories for this episode.
For this podcast. Oh, yes. And we've also read 3 of her books for this podcast.
Yes.
She is, I think, our most covered author at this point.
Yeah. And for good reason, I would say.
Yes.
Because I was struck anew reading these stories at just how good Tamsyn Muir is.
Yes. And also just, how firmly she is cited in the microgenre.
Yes. Although, of course, we sort of have a wizard story and a lesbian story here. And a wizard versus lesbian story of a kind.
Well, what we have is a wizard story, a lesbian story, and I still can't believe I agreed to read Homestuck fanfic story.
Well, you turned down the literary one, so I gave you the porn.
I turned down the literary one because wasn't it like 20,000 words or something?
And unfinished, yes.
Also, it was still Homestuck fanfic.
Yeah, but look, I think that it's like this to me, this episode, we might shake up the format a little bit of this episode, because to me, this one's going to be more about like the author. We're sort of a more critical approach to the works of this author as a whole,
right? Right.
Informed by these stories, and you can't have that full picture without.
I fully agree. Without reading, the stuff that she first got famous for writing, which is indeed Homestuck fan fiction.
Yes, and
unfortunately, as much as, it makes me sad, you really can't understand the Wizards versus Lesbians microgenre without understanding how much of it comes out of Homestuck fandom.
That is correct. And the thought that came to me after reading the Deepwater Bride, which I think may be my single favorite thing that she's written that I've read.
It is quite good.
There's definitely some recency bias there,
Right. The last thing I've read by Tamsyn Muir is always the best. No, but it is quite good.
I mean, Harrow is my favorite of her books, and it's obviously a novel length thing is a more impressive accomplishment. But as a piece of short fiction, I think The Deepwater Bride is head and shoulders above most short fiction of any genre that I've read. And I think that it's not unreasonable to compare Tamsyn Muir to some great authors in quotes. I think that she could stand up to, at this point in her career, God knows how much more she's going to write, and how, how we think about her will change over the years. But she could be another Nabokov in my mind. That's a little bit of hyperbole, but still, I think this is a great author. And
no, I agree. I think she's a great author. I think that you're right. To some degree, there is some recency bias here. She's a great author who's writing right now. And so it's hard to, see what how her work is going to stand up, particularly given how rooted it is in, how rooted the language is in, a certain internet idiom.
Yes. I've had to grapple with the fact that I will bet, I'll bet 100 United States dollars that Deepwater Bride started as a takeoff on the Me versus Other Girls meme. I was emotionally compromised by the Deepwater Bride. When I finished it, I lay back in my bed. And then the thing about Me versus Other Girls hit me. And I nearly died.
It's certainly very rude that. Okay, so in an effort to make this very slightly organized, so we. But let me just finish. Okay.
Let me just finish my thought first, because right. Yes, there is the problem of recency bias, but the flip side of that is that we might be in a position to understand the foundations of a great author in a way that may not have been afforded to anybody in the past, because their quote-unquote juvenilia is right there on the internet for us to look at right now.
That's true. And also, I mean, even previous generations of authors who got started in fanfic, often their fanfic names weren't, and archives weren't open to all, even after, they're on book 3 of their extremely successful and critically lauded series.
Yes, Taz has certainly made no effort to scrub this from her past.
Which, I know you do, but, I don't know Arcady Martine's AO3 alias. I'm sure you do.
I do, yes. But, it's Byzantine, in case anybody is wondering.
Oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. But, it was very easy to find Tamsyn Muir's.
Yeah, no.
I found it because when there was this random internet hate mob after her for, writing fan fiction, I was curious what they were all screaming about. And looked it up, and it was really easy to find, which is not even for every author today, but it is increasingly possible to find it for authors of this generation.
And that kind of internet transparency is part of Taz's whole deal, which is why I brought up the meme connection with that story and with many of her other stories, is that there is that dialogue with what is happening on the internet now, which is also very much a Homestuck thing. But let's...
really, her work is more a dialogue with what was happening on the internet 7 years ago, but...
Well, the Deepwater Bride is 7 years old now.
Yes, but Harrow, for example, isn't, but the memes in it are.
Maybe she will continue to write about the internet of 2015 for the rest of her life.
Right. That's it's going to be really interesting to me to see whether or not her writing continues, that her language continues to adopt newer internet things, or if it's going to be really, rooted in the era of internet in which, she really got her start.
Indeed. But now back onto some sort of track.
We are doing 3 Muir stories,
Yes.
One of which is The Deepwater Bride, which has plenty of lesbian, but not a ton of wizard.
There's a lot of magic.
Eldritch horrors. There's a lot of magic, and there's eldritch horrors, but there's not really a wizard figure in the way that we generally have.
I'm not even sure about that. I think that there might be more wizardy figures in there than you're giving credit for. But
that's fair. It's not as much of a standard Wizles story.
It certainly does not have as much wizard in it as The Magician's Apprentice.
The Magician's Apprentice, which, if Cherry were a lesbian, would be, the most wizards versus lesbians story I'd read in some ways, except, that they don't really fight. But it's a real depressing story.
But yes, and then Lalanne's Inferno, a story involving both a wizard and some lesbians.
Or at least a Homestuck troll and some lesbians.
The Homestuck troll in question is a shitty wizard, canonically.
All right. So these are the stories that we are reading. I guess let's just do a quick why you should and shouldn't read them, and then we'll jump into the spoiler zone. So why should you read The Deepwater Bride?
It's fantastic.
It's real good. It's just real good.
Yeah, I was just like blown away. Actually, I hadn't read it before.
Yeah, well, in fact, the reason why we even started doing short fiction roundups was partly because I wanted an excuse to cover The Deepwater Bride, and then we kept getting other stories on there instead for various reasons. But it's extremely good. I guess why shouldn't you read it? I guess if you're really allergic to Lovecraft.
Yeah, it's got a bunch of eldritch horrors in it. Blood and goo. It comes with the territory, but like.
Lots of. I think there is,
suicide
kind and eldritch
death.
Horrors and lots of blood and violence to ocean creatures and.
Yes, a lot of dead fish.
So, but yeah, if you're willing to read something that's, in the Lovecraftian genre, then if you're only ever going to read one story in that, this should be the one, because it is definitely the best of that genre I've ever read.
Yes. Why? Yeah, I can't think of any other reasons why you shouldn't read it. It's just a fantastic little story.
And like all of these, it's short.
Yes.
So, The Magician's Apprentice, why you should read it is it's also very well written.
Yes, I think that you can definitely see the development between the two of them.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's still better than the most of the standards of what we get here. It's kind of. Sorry,
I would also say, it's also that reading it, I think, in some ways, will help you catch certain. It's very much making a lot of the undercurrents of her other work very obvious, and so in some ways, it's like a reader's guide.
Yeah, exactly. The magician here is definitely a prototype John Gaius, to the extent that he's even named John also. And is like very normal dude and very evil at the same time, and talks like a dad.
It's the most. So I mean, I guess why shouldn't you read this book? Well, if you're allergic to wizard, to like, if for example you started to read The Unspoken Name and Belthandros just was too much of an awful wizardy guy for you and you couldn't keep going, then do not read The Magician's Apprentice.
This is also just like a very like. It's not even sublimated, like it's lampshaded grooming allegory. So
yes, yeah, no, it's extremely depressing, and yeah, it's a very upfront, very lampshaded story about grooming.
Yep. So even though no explicit sexual abuse happens in this one, there is a sort of,
or even like no sexual abuse at all happens in this one, but it's still very much a story about grooming.
This is one of those cases where a content warning
is a real spoiler.
Is a real spoiler, yeah.
Yeah.
What to do?
What to do?
Well,
perhaps we should just move that. Say that there's going to be one last content warning right after the spoiler zone.
Sure, I'll fiddle around with it
if possible. Sorry. So, why do you think? What are the reasons you think that someone should read this story?
Oh, it's beautifully constructed. Like really, sort of. It has that sense of like, it has more actually of a feeling of effective horror than Deepwater Bride. It's in my money more depressing and more horrific by a good margin than the Deepwater Bride. And
right, no, the Deepwater Bride is like, is a sort of charming horror romantic comedy. It's like it's romantic comedy dressed up as horror, and The Magician's Apprentice is just pure horror, straight through and through.
Agreed. But yeah, no, it's. I think my favorite thing about it is the pacing, and just sort of the steadily mounting dread. Also, it made me very hungry.
It did not make me hungry. It made me anti-hungry.
Different strokes for different folks.
Yes.
But, so, and now the third one. Why should you read that?
Well, if you want to understand where Tamsyn Muir's writing comes out of. And, I mean, the funny thing is, she's a good writer.
I mean, her, like, legitimately, I think I might have said this in the Homestuck episode or at some other Taz Muir episode, but I didn't read fanfic until I read Taz's fanfic, and then I was like, wait, there's fanfic like this out there? And then, I went on from there.
To become, quite a well-respected fanfic author yourself.
Citation needed, respected. To write some myself, yeah. But regardless, it is porn. This is porn. But it's well written porn, and it is interestingly thematically entirely consistent with the rest of her work. The big theme of her work, as I think I mentioned during the Nona episode, being the desire is a prison and a curse. And that is definitely present already in her Homestuck fanfiction.
Yes, this one is not as rooted in one of her other themes, which is just like exploring how people get corrupted.
Rose feels pretty corrupted, but she doesn't know how this happened to her.
And there's something of a question. Yeah. And, it's not a story. This is not a story of how somebody gets corrupted. This is a story of somebody perhaps already being so. But, so, well, why shouldn't you read this? I mean, for one thing, it's Homestuck. And if, if you either aren't familiar with Homestuck, or then I envy you, but, then like, this isn't going to make any sense, I don't think. Maybe it will. And if you've, managed to finally escape the gravitational pull of Homestuck, I guess this might be a danger to your recovery. I don't know. Also, I mean, for example, it has been I've, sufficiently out of Homestuck that I had to Google who the two screen names were.
Yes. Also, if it kind of relies on you having been around Homestuck fandom specifically for the March Aridin incident.
That would explain why a lot of this, even though I've read like a percentage of Homestuck, this story did not make a ton of sense to me. But so yeah, I guess why should you read this? If you want to read her Homestuck fan fiction, definitely read this one. It's short. If the thought of reading Homestuck fan fiction does not appeal, then do not bother reading this. Even though it is well written, I don't think there's enough there to make sense.
And there are many better Tamsyn Muir Homestuck fanfics out there also. Like, this isn't in the top 5. But
when Isaac posts this episode, he can also post his top 5 Tamsyn Muir Homestuck fanfics.
Oh, can I?
Yes, I think you should.
I don't want to. Okay.
You've just been talking up this woman's fan fiction, Isaac.
That's true. Okay, I'll do that. I will do that.
Excellent.
Okay. The best Homestuck fanfic that Tamsyn Muir wrote was Promstuck. Then we get the Serendipity Gospels, which are unpleasant to read, but made their way into canon. The Land of Froth and Frogs is very cute. It's just wholesome. My personal favorite is Three Treatises on Moral Allegiance because it contains rare Nepeta Equius content. Then there's The Conscience of Eurydice, which is the first piece of fanfic I read as an adult. Also, speaking of Byzantine, there's a story here called A Hymn of Empire, which was written by Taz for Arkady Martine. Make of that what you will. But it is, however, the most Wizards versus Lesbians one, except The Conscience of Eurydice, which, as we mentioned, is long and unfinished. But is probably also recapitulated in The Deepwater Bride. So...
All right, shall we get into it?
Yeah, let's get into it. Shall we talk about, anyway, spoiler zone here. Spoiler zone. Great. And yes, it turns out that if you want to be a magician, you have to eat freshly killed people.
Yes.
Slathered in teriyaki sauce.
Which is heavily foreshadowed. So I guess let's start with The Magician's Apprentice.
Yeah, I think so.
So yes. So, I mean, the eating people thing is heavily foreshadowed. I mean, the first thing you learn about his apartment is that it smells like rotting bodies. And whenever somebody pauses before they tell you what kind of meat something is...
Yeah, no, it should not... The twist is not so much you're surprised at what has happened, but the horror is more like how many excuses this girl makes for him. how
I mean,
like,
the horror is just how
twisted...
realistic it is that, you
right.
know, she starts out being this sort of, you know, vulnerable preteen who has latched on to a guy, and also part of the horror is that it starts out like showing what a safe guy he is, like the way that, you know, every time she tries to sort of push any sort of sexual boundary with him, he pushes her off. You know, the fact that, like, he really seems to be positioning himself as a surrogate father,
Yes.
you know, making her do her homework, you know, even like the classes that she doesn't particularly like, and giving her literature assignments, and the sort of, and it becomes increasingly clear as the story develops that even though there is no sex in this relationship, that, you know, she is being groomed. And that's really, and just sort of just watching that happen and watching how somebody can in fact use being a safe guy as the way that, as, you know, his lever to, you know, control this teenage girl is horrific. And, you know, like, and then it just, the eating people and the magic is just sort of, you know, a useful metaphor to hang on to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not just that he's the safe guy. It's like he's aggressively normal.
Right.
You know, apart, like, you know, and sort of even the smell of putrefaction around his apartment is like, oh yeah, you're a bachelor man. It's normal for your apartment to be messy and smell bad. Even though that's like, you know, that's part of his disguise.
Yes.
And
you know, like the fact that, like, he always seems to have a girlfriend for just enough time to, you know, establish that he's a normal guy who goes on normal dates. But, like,
yeah,
you know, he never has any sort of really long, intimate relationship.
Yeah. It's, and like, she thinks she knows how old he is, but she probably doesn't. And, you know,
right.
that kind of thing. His, you know, and even like having established himself as the safe guy, you know, it's like, what he says to her when she finds out, when she finds out, is like when she comes back to his apartment at 2 a.m, being like, you know, I burned my bridges, I live here now.
Right.
He's waiting for her to do that so that it's her fault.
Yes.
And
right. The fact that, you know, he's like, well, I've always told you magicians eat and eat and eat. I've eaten your whole childhood. And he makes it out to be like, this is his tragedy.
Right, right. I mean, this is like
childhood.
Textbook wizards versus lesbian wizard shit.
Right.
And, you know, and also, like, he gave her Lolita.
Right.
Because he was like, he wanted... I mean, and that's like, I told you what was happening. I gave you this book which explains what is happening, and you still came back. Therefore, you
it's even
are
better than that.
Volunteering to participate in this, you know?
Right, it's even better than that, because, like, he's slow, like, he ramps up. You know, he starts with, like, The Catcher in the Rye. He's sort of he's slowly giving her this curriculum of the kind of fiction that, you know, that teenagers read to sort of tell themselves, to, you know, sort of spin themselves a narrative about why they don't feel like they fit in, and how this is actually part of some, like, grand thing that makes them smarter and more insightful. Which is also the way that people groom teenagers. And the fact that, like, he's got this escalating literature curriculum, which, you know, first it moves into Catcher in the Rye, and it culminates with Lolita.
Yeah. Two, ironically, one probably a pedophile to one probably not a pedophile, but that's
right. But
you know, allegedly. But that's also like a connection between this and the Deepwater Bride, is that feeling of, oh, I'm not like, you know, other girls, so the rules don't apply to me. You know?
Right, and the thing is, in the Deepwater Bride, again, it's like, it's part of this sort of, it's part
like,
of the
however
sort of
fluffy
of a romantic
that might be,
comedy.
You know, she's still getting devoured by the Netherlord as a result of that feeling.
Right. Well, this is, again, I think one of the things, I mean, this is attached to your whole desire as a prison thing, but part of the thing that fascinates me about all of her writing is that all of these are stories of how people corrupt themselves out of loneliness.
Yeah, and
like slowly sort of peel away all of their values.
Love, or love in quotes, as a mechanism of control.
Sometimes, and sometimes they don't. Like, with Gideon, Gideon's Harrow isn't really using love as a mechanism of control on Gideon.
Harrow is like using her lack of attention as a mechanism of control. Like,
well, I mean, really, it's her loneliness. It's her own loneliness that really ends up catching Gideon.
Those are like two people who are suffering from the same thing. Like,
right,
staking
but
to
it's
each
still
other.
right. But still, Gideon the Ninth is still a story of somebody who very rightfully wants freedom and independence and a chance to have healthy relationships. And it's the course of a book where she talks herself into not wanting and valuing any of these things and eventually killing herself for the sake of the person who has bullied her mercilessly throughout their entire childhood.
Yes. And it's like, and to go back to the story at hand, Cherry just walks further and further into this trap of her own volition. Like, she,
right.
It's like she sort of, and like her connection to her own father is probably, super fucked up. But John almost coaches her into how to not feel that or take any of it seriously, any of his attempts to get her to like bring her back or to establish an actual relationship with her.
Right.
And it's like he like sort of in a kind of a buddy, roll eyes at poor stupid dad way, he is helping her to isolate herself and helping her to isolate herself.
Yes.
And like making him, and like he is sort of, he acts as an object of desire that like sort of ruins her ability to chat up anybody else even, like.
And I mean, and the fact that, like
she fails to make a connection with the boy, with Callum, the boy that she is dating, and like.
Yes, though, I mean that's
fails and
right. Though I mean the thing with the connection with the boy is sort of interesting because this is a prom date where he's clearly, he's several years older. This is also the kind of guy who, the kind of like sophomore or junior or whatever he is, who asks out an 8th grader, is actually not the kind of guy she should necessarily be that she's going to be forming a healthy bond with.
No, he's not. But it's, that's also like a, predators can smell.
Right, exactly.
This kind of person.
Right, exactly. And like, it's not even clear that she's particularly into him. It's just, she's very excited that part of it, she's very excited to be getting. Attention. Right, exactly. And in the same way that she responds to John's attention. And I think like even the ways that John makes himself out to be the safe guy are so deeply creepy. Like the way that, he shames her and silently for any time that she tries to get, that she tries to initiate physical intimacy with him, which first of all makes a lot of stuff that could just be, fairly innocuous automatically be creepy.
Yeah. And it establishes that any kind of physical touch between them is creepy.
Right, exactly.
And you'll notice that when she comes in at the end, he's immediately all over her, like physically.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
You can interpret that final moment where she has to make the decision about whether she's all in or not when he's pressing her head down into the kitchen table. Like, that is rapey as hell. In addition to, probably being a death threat under the circumstances.
Yes.
But, you can read that either way and it makes sense either way,
Yeah. But the other thing is that, aside from making everything supercharged and creepy, it also, at no point does he say, look, you can't do this. Look, this, X isn't healthy, or no, I don't feel comfortable doing this. Instead, he has all these silent rules and just punishes her with shame when she breaks them. But never tells her what those rules are.
Yes. She as a result, he trains her to just observe him constantly and to become hyper attuned to his approval or disapproval.
Yes.
And it's a real anatomization of of this phenomenon,
Right. It's a very clear, well-constructed depiction of exactly how this sort of thing can happen. Mm-hmm. And, the fact that there's telekinesis and cannibalism is just, making the metaphors extra obvious for you.
Yes, it really is. Like, hey, Harriet Potter, you're the special teenager. We have special rules in this house. Right. We do special things in this house.
Right, like all the ways that he tells her that she's special. And...
Yeah. You should...
He said she... there's another one about the literature. He said she easily read at college level, though he also said that didn't amount to much these days.
Yes. My other...
Right, just like, what a, oh, you're so special and mature, but also don't get a big head or, expect that anybody else is going to think you're special.
Right. Only I recognize this about you, but, nobody else is going to value you for it.
Yeah, right. No one else will ever give you validation, but I recognize that, you're special. Ugh.
My favorite line in this is her only complete dumbasses weren't nice to the girlfriend.
Yes.
Because it's like, not only, like she knows this trope, and like, I want to know where she knows this from, It's like, I want to know.
Well, to me, this actually read partly as her thinking that she's smarter than she is. Like she's wiser exactly. and more understanding than she is.
She knows what's going down.
She's like, I know what's going down. Right, exactly. Oh, don't worry. I'm mature. I totally understand that, it would be childish and weird for me to get jealous of your girlfriends.
Right. Well, it's like with the touching, it's the implied opposite side of that, making it very loud.
Yes. So anyway, the story is horrific, but the cannibalism is like one of the less horrific bits.
Exactly. And again, made me really hungry. It was very good depiction of being really hungry for rare meat, which is the situation that I find myself in occasionally.
That it is.
Yep.
And I do still really love goat meat, so I'm glad that the story didn't put me off it.
We got distracted talking about kosher goat meat, so here comes the Deepwater Bride. All right, shall we move on to the Deepwater Bride at this point?
The Deepwater Bride.
Yeah.
Yes. So here's the story that, while still being, the story of somebody being drowned beneath the waves, is so much of a happier, sweeter story.
Kind of.
part of this is just compared to the unrelenting grimness that is The Magician's Apprentice.
Yes, it's much more fun to read than The Magician's Apprentice, although they're both quite fun to read just because Taz's prose is always so entertaining, and all of her stuff is funny, even when it's like horrifically depressing.
Yes.
But we should incidentally, also, have you ever read the webcomic that she wrote?
I didn't even know she wrote a webcomic.
Okay, we should circle around to that as well.
Is it Homestuck?
It's not Homestuck, but it is illustrated by one of her fellow big name Homestuck alums.
That's fine.
Anywho.
Well, then, yes, you should send me a link. I'll read it at some point.
It's very much on brand. The webcomic in question is called Apathy, and you will never guess what it's about. A little girl with strong morals that lead her into corruption, bad relationships with her parents, interaction with a pedophile, and finally the physical merging of two bodies. Who could have written this?
Anyway, so the Deepwater Bride.
The Deepwater Bride. So if you remember back in 2015, the me versus other girls meme.
Yes. I think that's a lot older than 2015, actually.
Yeah,
but
it's the other. There was a lot of shipping art of me,
and these are and these are exactly, and like the way that Rainbow is described, she is exactly the other girl in that. And,
she's described as having Garfield colored skin, which was my favorite line in the entire. Her skin was the color of Garfield, and bleach blonde hair, short shorts constantly,
She has a bedazzled Samsung phone.
She is every bit the popular normal girl, except she's an elder god.
Like well, except that she's every bit the popular normal girl, except that she's like utterly batshit even from the beginning.
A sociopath who turns out to be an elder god.
And the thing is that she's like, but also like she's other girls, but she's also like a classic manic pixie dream girl type.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Except that again, when she, like the first time that, first of all, her name is Rainbow.
Yes.
But also, the first time that Hester, is that her name?
Yes. Hester and
sees
Rainbow.
Her. Right, Hester and Rainbow. And the first time that Hester sees her, like, she's, twirling in the sparkling eldritch salt snow.
Yes. While her normal girl compatriots are freaked out, she's doing an Amelie in the middle of the street.
Yes.
Yeah, no, Rainbow's kind of a fascinating character.
She is. I love the way that she talks like an old man because she's actually an elder god. And so, she doesn't talk like a teenager. She talks like an old man. It's trying to like speak the slang of kids these days.
I'm so, I mean, not to get all gushy about this again, but like, I'm so impressed with the writing that this person does. Like, it's so well considered and so detailed and so silly, and yet so like, again, Nabokov is the comparison that comes to mind. But yeah, no, like. So essentially, Hester is part of this family of seers. Hester herself is a seer and can predict.
Yes, a teenage oracle.
Yeah, she can predict a lot of. She can't choose what she's going to predict, but she can see the future and all kinds of things.
Right. She including like she can see next week's weather in her scrambled eggs, or she can see that jogger is going to drop her Gatorade.
Speaking of themes in Taz's work, horrible meals.
Yes.
Big on horrible meals.
It's true. There's just a lot of horrible food.
Much like the protagonist of The Magician's Apprentice, she is not living with her parents and is estranged from her mother, who became
a dental hygienist.
Yes, it's implied that she's turned her back on the doomed oracle family life,
or doomed oracle family life, which
Hester is rebelling by.
Honestly, sounds like a good life decision.
Yes.
But Hester, being a teenager, is living with her aunt, who is a fellow doomed oracle.
Indeed, I like her aunt a lot.
Her aunt is great.
Yeah, and her aunt, who is a chain smoker, who makes mostly terrible meals, and they. Their family's job is basically to record the history of the incursions of the ancient gods, like basically Lovecraft elder gods, into the world, and in return for this service, they are spared from the depredations of said elder gods when the elder gods come into the world.
Yes,
and once again, like, something exciting happens, and Hester's really excited about the fact that something exciting is happening, even as her older and wiser aunt, who doesn't know when Hester is going to die and therefore is concerned that this might kill Hester,
right, is
like, please don't get yourself involved in this. But Hester, being a rebellious teenager, goes ahead and does it. And what is happening is that the elder god has come to claim the bride, her bride, gender, bride.
Yes.
And Hester thinks that Rainbow is the chosen bride because all of the things that she's looking at are say that the chosen
happening around Rainbow.
Yeah, and that the journals that she's consulting say that the chosen brides become like, act like they're in love, basically. Right. And not like, love, like, companionate love, but like, first love, puppy insanity love.
And they all actually seem happy to learn that they've been chosen as the elder god's bride, and thus are going to be taken beneath the waves.
Yes, and Rainbow is completely unflappable, and seems to be blissed out all the time. And so Hester naturally concludes that Rainbow is the bride, but it turns out that Hester is the elder god, that Rainbow is the elder god, and
Rainbow is the elder god, and Hester is the bride,
which is a good solid twist.
It's a good solid twist. I mean, it's fairly well. It is also fairly well foreshadowed.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't come out of nowhere, but
it definitely doesn't come out of nowhere. By the time that she has her big fight with Rainbow about when the guy. Oh, speaking of another Taz motif, somebody impaling himself on a fence.
Yep.
And the fact that Rainbow is just completely like, oh, how neat. Are you going to write this down in your oracle book? Well, it's just like, a man just committed suicide right in front of us. Well, what the fuck? You are a sociopath.
And it's like, this is sort of one of the, speaking again of Taz themes, this is sort of the crux of, well, how revolutionary do you want your queer desire to be? Like, are we Thelma and Louising this? The fact that we are, turning against like conventional morality by being two teenage girls in love with each other, and also by being like two, very special girls who are, weird and magical in Hester's case because she's, this like smart doomed goth chick, and in Rainbow's case because she is she's bipolar / an elder god. Or, bipolar on an extended manic phase, or an elder god. It seems very natural to Rainbow. It's like, oh, okay, so we're both different. We both don't care about the normie morality and, societal structures, because this stupid town, this doom is the most interesting thing that's ever happened to it, and we both agree on that. We both like looking at dead things. This human corpse seems perfectly within bounds for that. And Hester's like, no, actually, I still possess basic human morals. I don't want to revolutionize those.
At this stage in the story.
Right. But she does eventually change her mind about that. Or that's implied, at least, if she's going to go live in the deep water with Rainbow.
Yes.
And presumably become a dread queen of the under. This is all also very Homestuck. Unfortunately, like Rose does become a Lovecraftian horror girl, and but that aside, putting Homestuck aside, even though you can't put Homestuck aside when you're talking about Tamsyn Muir. So that to me, that is my favorite part of the story, is just that it's like, well, I thought we were both along for the ride, I thought that this was the, anarchy, fuck the world ride, that the two of us who are better than everybody else, and so their lives don't matter. I thought that's what we were doing. And Hester eventually decides that, yes, that is what we were doing.
Right.
And frankly, like, whether you're a teenager or a grown adult, that's always a little bit appealing, There was always that temptation to be like, no, actually, I and my ideas and my love and my, my burning self are special enough that none of these other people matter at all, because they're just normies.
And we can just fuck off into the bottom of the ocean.
Exactly.
And drown everyone around us.
Yes. And ourselves, ultimately.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's actually, if you stop and think about it for a few minutes, it's just as horrific.
It is. Right. Part of it's but it's a different tone, right? Because there's a reading of this story where, yes, horrible things happen, but, the main characters get this sort of, but like in this weird, twisted way, love triumphs, and she gets to, be Dread Queen under the sea. There's, you can read this as a sort of, you can almost read this as the kind of, because like in fantasy and often you get, and really in fiction a lot in general, you get this idea that nobody but the protagonists matter. That's why, that's why in so many of our stories, sexual assault is this horrifying thing that only ever happens off screen to people we don't care about.
Yes.
And so one of the things I really like about this is that the story is almost completely that, where, you know, it can just be funny, except that you have this brief moment in the middle where Hester's like, wait a minute, no, this is horrifying and you're a sociopath.
Yeah, no, the story...
And then we go back to the story that, you know, we were having before.
Yeah, like through the medium of the, you know, I'm outside your bedroom window and I've thrown a stone through it instead of against it because that's funnier. Right. But you know, and we're going to have this confrontation and she's going to throw my packet of cereal dramatically back at me after we've had this conversation. But it's like, what are we actually signing up for here? We're signing up for, you know, fuck the world. It's just the two of us and everybody else can die. And will.
Yeah.
Except her, I mean, it's, I guess it makes the decision slightly easier that her aunt won't.
Right. Well, see, this is what I mean. No named character dies in this.
Right. Exactly. The
like,
other town.
There's horrifying losses, but they all happen to unnamed people.
Well, except the guy down at the gas station gets a name. He's definitely not going to survive this.
Oh, that's true. I forgot about the guy down at the gas station. So okay, but you know, if he dies, it's off screen.
Right. Exactly.
And you know, no character who like we get any real insight into. And, you know, first of all, so I like that break because it doesn't let you completely get away with pretending that this is a lighthearted rom-com.
Yeah.
You know, this is definitely the sort of thing that is a lighthearted rom-com for, you know, for the kinds of edgy teens that read too much Sandman in high school. But at the same time, it sticks in that one scene that will not let you completely pretend that all these things happening around are meaningless.
Yes.
But at the same time, you can still read this as a rom-com, and there's absolutely no reading whatsoever of The Magician's Apprentice that isn't horrific. And that's why this is still, by far, the lighter, happier story.
Yes, that is absolutely true. It's, you know, you keep thinking, well, I mean, that makes it more insidious in its own way. And it's like, you know, I'm not mounting that as a criticism because, like, the author absolutely makes sure to tip her hand to let us know that she knows what's happening here, you know?
Yes.
Which is, again, one of the things I just love about Taz's fiction is there's always a couple more layers of, you know, what are we examining here, you know, at play. But you can just go read it straight and enjoy it also, you know, if you want to. And there's definitely there's some emotional highs to be had here, you know. Anybody who remembers being that kind of I am completely outside the world and I'll never have any true friends teenager. I mean, I was one of them.
Right. Yes.
You know,
same.
The idea of finding the person who actually understands you, and that the combination of she's so angry that this is the person who she's falling in love with, which is a great little, a great little tone, but it's all...
Because it's very much how can I be so cringe as to be falling for a girl named Rainbow who has a bedazzled Samsung and wears short shorts and
exactly
has, legs the color of orange soda. And...
Speaking of which, Rose completely unable to deal with the fact that she is turned on by Aridin in a miniskirt. But yeah, no, the feeling of, oh no, you actually do meet the person and you get it, and it's not just a high school thing that's part of your developmental process into becoming a real human being who can actually socialize and exist in the world, but it is the forever love because we're both going down to the bottom of the ocean together. There's something so the temptation in there, it's that's the thing. Reading this, it's this is the thing that I wanted most in the entire fucking world. During the part of my life where I felt feelings the most strongly,
Yes.
And oof, the juxtaposition between that and, you're going to hell and you're condemning your entire town to destruction by doing so.
Right.
It's like, ooh, that's potent. That is potent.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's it's great. And like, it's just also, again, the writing is just very good. Speaking of meals, I love the thing where she is, where she says that she wanted her waffle to be ash on her tongue, but actually it was delicious. This toaster waffle.
Yes. When has an Eggo ever been ashes on somebody's tongue? They're good. That's why they still exist. But yeah, no, the fact that she has her mouth full of waffle that her doomed aunt has squirted syrup faces on when the dread god comes to her door and explodes her warding candles. Just like, who but Taz, it's just top tier shit. So shall we talk about the Homestuck fanfic?
Let's talk about the Homestuck fanfic.
So just to give context here, there was I'm not going to specify the year because I don't want to get it wrong, but during peak Homestuck there was an official calendar released with art for every month by different fan artists, because of course there was, because Andrew Hussey loves using other people's work and merchandise that he sells. But the picture for March was, for no specific reason, or for no reason that anybody could understand at the time, Aridin dressed like a slutty schoolgirl in like heavy makeup, short skirt. And this became an instant like meme and flashpoint within the fandom. There were, of course, the predictable stupid arguments about, whether this is, transphobic somehow,
pro-trans or transphobic,
right, or and blah blah. You can picture all of the ensuing discourse, yes. I'm sure, but
I've already run the entire simulation in my head and I'm ready to move on.
Yes, but the overall reaction was one of delight, and March Aridin showed up for a long time thereafter in fan art of all kinds. And so this is Taz's, and I think the absolutely hilarious thing, which you may have seen in the preface, is that Taz submitted this to a kink meme fill, and then when nobody took it, she filled it
like,
herself.
I'll write it myself.
So intent was she on speaking this into the world.
Yes.
And so in this story, they're all aged up to 18, so everything's fine, you guys. Despite
the fact that it's under archive warning underage.
I mean, don't even get me started. They're all aged up to 18, so it's fine, you guys, and they're all alive, despite having canonically murdered each other. And this is one of those futures where everybody's on the space station or whatever, and Aridin comes over to Kanaya's apartment every Friday, as does Rose, and they all get dressed up in their favorite outfits because Kanaya loves to sew and loves fashion.
Kanaya dresses them up.
Yes.
In her favorite outfits on them.
Indeed. And Aridin is no more sympathetic than he was in the comic. In fact, she says that he has become even more of an asshole as he has aged. And Rose is in love with Kanaya and is really distressed by the fact that she finds Aridin in this slutty outfit intolerably sexy, and so goes every week to basically to torture herself, because she cannot make herself admit to anybody that this is happening to her, but she can also not make herself walk away. So she is caught in this horrific limbo of going to this chaste but incredibly sexually charged session every week, and then going back to her room and diddling herself over it. And so, and that's the story. That's it. I just told you the whole thing. Story. The prose is good. The prose is like good because Taz is a good writer, but that's all there is to it. And but as I said, we can still find plenty of absolutely typical Taz shit in here, because on some level, Rose Lalonde is a lot of Tamsyn Muir protagonists. Like Harrow is not un-Rose Lalonde. The Hester is very much just Rose Lalonde. Even Sherry. Well, no, not Sherry, really. But there's a lot of...
Why not Cherry?
Why not Cherry?
Yeah, what are the things that make Cherry not Rose Lalonde like?
I think it's her
all,
Rose,
because all of these are sort of small bitter girls wanting to demonstrate how much more together and grown up and smart they are.
That is true. That is definitely the common thread, and they all have like horrific relationships with their birth parents, and just like Rose. The difference between Rose and Cherry is that Rose is never going to be going out onto the beach in her swimsuit and talking to boys to try to get somebody's attention. But then again, Cherry is straight, or yes. Straight-ish. As straight as far as she or we know. But yeah, no, so to a greater or lesser extent, most of Taz's protagonists up till this point have had a helping of Rose in them. And this is a character who is trapped by her own loneliness and is therefore torturing herself about it. And she is incapable of communicating with either of the other two people in here. Explicitly, she would rather die than admit to either of them anything about what she's feeling. Pride, again, a huge thing. Like deadly, self-destructive pride in Taz's protagonist, which is also incidentally the main theme of her most famous Homestuck fandom. I meant fanfic, obviously, but this is also the plot of her comic. The Serendipity Gospels, in which Terezi is so incredibly ashamed of being attracted to the Gamzee, the murder clown. And that story actually made its way into Homestuck canon, because this whole thing is a fucking Ouroboros.
And because, as we've established, Hussey
liberally borrows from his fans.
Loves nothing better than monetizing other people's art.
Yes, yes. And how sympathetic you choose to be about his habit of doing that is one's own affair.
Yes.
And so...
Yeah, I guess... one thing, because, I wouldn't call Gideon or Nona particularly Rose-like.
No. Gideon is much more Dave-like.
I will have to take your word on it. To be honest, I really don't remember any of these characters. I vaguely remember some of the trolls' personalities, and that's about it.
To be honest, Gideon is mostly like Dave in that she wears sunglasses and swears a lot. That's
actually not
cool.
That much like Dave.
Yeah, no, that's more a joke than anything else. But
I read Homestuck fan fiction, but I refuse to sit through Homestuck jokes.
I apologize.
Mostly because apparently I won't get them. Anyway, so... But, this is definitely gets into the... I was much more interested in this sort of theme of exploring what are the ways in which loneliness make people strip away all of their values.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but this one seems much more about... this seems somewhat about that, though, and maybe this is just because I'm not a teenager, but I read this and I don't quite get why Rose is... I can understand why Rose doesn't want to admit it to herself, but the idea that this is like deeply wrong and corrupt.
I think that it's not so much the shame of it's deeply wrong and corrupt to want to be, to have a three-way with a dude in a dress. It's more that it's morally wrong and corrupt to have a three-way with this specific dude in a dress because he is an irredeemable
this
asshole.
Is awful.
Yeah. A horrible, rude, wizard man who actually murdered her girlfriend, even though they made up afterwards, or her, the person who she loves, So I think this is another one of those fanfic cases where the extra context of Eridan being who Eridan is sort of the real source of the problem there.
I remember that Eridan is supposed to be the worst. I just, I did not, for example, know that he was the one who put the giant hole in Kanaya.
Yes.
Speaking of resonances, did you notice, Gideon's giant chest hole?
Yeah, giant chest holes are there's so many giant chest holes in Homestuck. I think because Hussey enjoyed drawing them. And
anyway, the fact that Tamsyn Muir was acting all goofily self-righteous about her fans, being into sexualizing Gideon's chest hole is deeply hypocritical. Given,
it's not hypocritical. It's straight up a joke.
I figured. Yeah, I mean, yes. The joke is the hypocrisy.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
But, because that is one of the very few things I also remember from Homestuck, perhaps because of that one fanfic you wrote.
Yes. I would like to think that Taz has read my fanfic and was thinking of that when she made that joke, but I do not know. I turned 40 in a month, and I still want senpai to notice me. But regardless, but yeah, no, it's again, as you said in the first place, the reason that you might want to read this is Taz's other better, Homestuck fanfiction, longer Homestuck fanfiction is that it is sort of, and you do have to kind of know Homestuck in order to be able to read that, but it is a bit of a cheat sheet into the preoccupations that will go on to define her work.
And funnily, this is actually the least depressing of the three stories.
Yeah, no, I mean Rose is really if you upset about this, but frankly, she's in a pretty good situation.
Right. Well, the thing is, one thing that's interesting to me is that these stories each has such a very different tone. To some degree, each of these are stories about gothy teenage girls, trying to come to terms with, their loneliness and their sexuality. But one is straight up horror, one is comedy horror, and one is mostly just a story of a girl, still not able to get over the fact that she is somewhat turned on by an asshole.
Yes.
In a skirt.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that one of the reasons why I continue to praise Taz's, just skills as a writer is because, and, we've said that we are somewhat terrified that the next book in the Ninth House sequence will be written like the epilogue to Nono was.
Yes.
But
she's very good with tone.
Yeah, no,
voice.
she picks the appropriate tone for the thing that she wants to write and proceeds from there, as opposed to writing stuff in her voice. And despite that, her writing is very distinctive, even though I would say the voice in Magician's Apprentice is as stark and unpleasant as she gets.
But it's still very much one of her stories, and I think that's partly because
part of it is that the jokes are very
familiar. Part of it's that the jokes are very familiar. I think it's also just that the way that she writes really does have this sort of, it's very well constructed, it's very clear, but it just has the rhythms of a 2013 Tumblr post.
The other way you can tell it's Taz if you trip over a quotation from the webcomic Achewood and fall flat on your face. Yeah, no, there is that. And I'm sure that on some level, my level of affection for her writing has to do with
right.
My level of affection for that particular time in posting history. But
Yes.
You know.
But it is really interesting the way that she manages to sort of free associate her way through, the early teens Tumblr-y section of the internet, and still have everything be like so easily. I'm not going to say easy to follow, but that like the memes and stuff and the little asides that you also get even in Magician's Apprentice they manage to sort of continue to propel you along the narrative instead of pulling you out of them.
Yeah, in this it's like when I was a kid I used to read like I read Doonesbury and Bloom County a lot because I love comics, and old Doonesbury and Bloom County books are full of cultural references that I had no way of understanding,
Right.
But
I wonder if reading like Gideon the Ninth in 20 years, some like teenager is going to pick up Gideon the Ninth and have the same feeling that we had reading old Doonesbury comics.
Right, and it's like it in no way diminished my enjoyment. I was just like, that sounds like it's probably funny. I'm going to laugh at that, And then you get the pleasure later in life of like learning something, or like, oh, that's who Caspar Weinberger was, or
right.
All that kind of stuff. So yeah, no, I think that these will because of that, because it doesn't rely on you getting the references, except for like the fanfic, obviously. I think that they will stand the test of time in that way, but who is to say?
It will be very interesting to see.
Mm-hmm. And that, I think that brings us to the end of this episode.
Yeah.
So that was a bunch of
Thanks
business.
Thanks everyone for listening.
Have a good one, and we will see you next time on Wizards vs. Lesbians.
This is a podcast. We're not going to see anyone.
You will hear us next time. Sounded professional there, and you had to go and point that out.
You will hear us next time on Wizards vs. Lesbians.
Bye.
Bye.
The book we're doing next time is called Payback's a Witch. I know.